If you think you need to use expensive, high-grade timbers to make a beautiful, forever piece of furniture, then I suppose you're going to tell them they should watch this video. Yeah, I was. You should. I had two goals for this build. One was to use material I already had for as much of the build as possible, including this old top, a whole lot of melamine I was given for free, and 12mm MDF that I also got for free. And secondly, I wanted to experiment using 2x4s for fine furniture. I've used it in the past for outdoor furniture, but not for an indoor piece. The only timber I bought for the dresser was a few 2x4s, an extra board for the top, and the moulding for the drawer fronts. The first task was to mill up the 2x4s, which were going to make up the side panels. These were surprisingly flat and straight, so I only needed to go through the thicknesser to dress all four sides. I then cut the boards down to length for the stiles, which will also be the legs, and the offcuts would make up the rails for the side panels. The sides of the dresser were going to have an inset panel of 12mm MDF, so I cut a rebate in all the pieces for that panel to fix into. I then cross-cut the stiles and rails to their final dimensions. The joinery method for the rails to the stiles was dowels, so I had to remove a section of the rebate at both ends of the stiles. The lower rail will be 150mm off the floor, and the section of stile below that will be tapered on two inside faces to be the legs of the dresser. I'm using two pencil lines on the fence and the insert plate of my table saw that line up with the blade, so I can make those initial cuts without cutting past my marks. I then removed the waste piece with a handsaw and tidied up the cuts with a chisel and a block plane. I used a really simple jig to cut the taper on the two inside faces of each stile to form the legs. My blade wasn't high enough for some of these cuts, so again I finished them off by hand. I used the Dowmax doweling jig to drill the holes in the stiles and in the end of the rails. Each joint had 4 8mm dowels. If you've watched my videos, you'll know how much I love this jig. It's such a high quality tool, and it's so accurate. Every time. Probably went a little heavy on the glue with these joints, but hey, better than not enough, right? The back panel for the dresser was 12mm MDF because that's what I had, so I cut a rebate in the back of the two side panels using the router table and a 1/2 inch spiral bit. This was a stopped rebate at the lower rail, so again I used pencil lines on the router table to mark where my bit was. I then squared up the round corners with the chisel. When the MDF panel is inserted into the side frame, there's a seam between the two, and rather than trying to hide it or just leaving it as is, I chamfered the outside edge of the panel and the inside edge of the frame to accentuate it, and it was one of those little subtle details that make a big difference in a piece of furniture. It's always very satisfying when you have a perfect fit. I clamped them up and left them to dry. With the side panels done, it was now time to join the sides together with some long stretchers to complete the carcass of the dresser. These bottom joints got 3 1/2 inch dowels each because I used much thicker dimension timber for the bottom stretchers and thinner ones at the top. You can see here the back stretcher has the rebate cut into it for the back panel, and because the stretchers are longer than the clamps I have, I screwed on these clamping blocks, which worked out great. All those screw holes won't be seen in the final product. I glued up one side at a time to make it easier on myself, and when that had dried, I could then glue up the other side panel. Again with the glue. What was I thinking? Once everything had set, I added 4 of these corner braces to the base. The next stage of the build was the internal structure for the drawers and drawer runners. I marked the position of the vertical dividers for the top drawers onto the front stretcher and transferred those marks to the horizontal divider. I then marked and drilled the holes for the screws. I attached the dividers with only one screw at first so I could check they were square and not skewed before adding a second screw. I used pocket holes to attach these pieces to the side panels using a spacer piece, and the dividers were also screwed to the top stretcher. Off camera, I drilled more holes for dowels to attach the horizontal drawer runner supports. I made up the rest of the top drawer runner support framework and glued and screwed it in place, set back from the front edge of the dresser to allow for the inset drawer fronts. I then made up the centre divider piece for the lower drawers and fixed that in place. I installed the upper drawer runners first using a scrap of timber to line up the front edge of the runner with the front of the divider. The inside of the side panels needed to be packed out for support for the drawer runners, so I milled up some leftover cedar I had to the required thickness and installed them vertically to line up with the screw holes in the runners. These could have been installed horizontally as well. I just chose to do it this way. I could then install the rest of the runners. I had some slight gaps which were no more than the thickness of a business card, so I packed them out rather than bending the runner slightly if I just screwed them in place. I used two sticks clamped together to get accurate measurements between the runners for each drawer, and then started cutting up the drawer parts from all that free melamine I had. Melamine is very prone to chip out, so for the drawer parts that would be seen, I made sure to make a score cut first on the underside of the piece before cutting all the way through. I do have the blade height all the way up for these cuts, and that's because it leaves a much cleaner edge on the top of the melamine, but always have your blade height set just above your boardman cutting regular timbers. I know melamine is not a usual choice of material for bedroom furniture, but one of my goals with this piece was to use up what I had, and in the end, the white drawers were the perfect colour choice to go with the pink that my daughter chose for the dresser. All exposed edges of the melamine that would be seen were edge banded. I won't go too much into making these drawers in this video, but if you want to know more, check out the video I made about installing sliding trays in our pantry, which I'll link below and at the end of the video. With the drawer boxes made, I could attach the runners onto the sides and hope they fit. To attach the top to the dresser, I fitted these figure 8 fasteners on top of the side rails by drilling the right sized hole with a Forstner bit, just deep enough so the bracket and screw head will be flush or just slightly below the top of the dresser. I used a chisel to remove those small corners from the holes and screwed the brackets down so they were tight but still able to move. On the back stretcher I drilled holes for screws to screw up into the top, and on the front stretcher I drilled elongated holes to allow for the top to expand and contract. Talking about the top, let's make that now. The old board I was going to reuse had a large split in it where it had been glued together before, so I ripped it in half along that seam so I could glue it back together again. I ran the boards through the drum sander to remove the old finish, which was a big mistake. The finish just clogged up the sandpaper, and as the paper got more clogged, it just got worse, and the old finish ended up melted onto the paper. These are the drums after I tried to clean them up with the rubber stick. I had to install new sandpaper. Take my advice, a drum sander is not a paint stripper. I ended up finishing them off with a card scraper, which had no problem removing the old finish. Once the boards were cleaned up, I ran the saw edges over the jointer to get a perfect glue line and cut off the old edge profile. I used the dowel max again to install dowels just to help with alignment, and then glued the top back together. I had to add an extra board to the old top to get the depth I needed. Nice glue squeeze out. I realised later that I was still about 20mm short on the depth of the top, so I had to glue a small strip on at the back. Good thing this dresser has a paint finish. With the top done, I moved on to the drawer fronts. I used my miter sled with a thin curved blade to cut the moulding for the drawers, and to get a perfect fit, each piece of moulding was measured directly from its position on the corresponding drawer front, which were also 12mm MDF. I used this simple jig to help with lining up the moulding for measuring, and also to help me glue the pieces flush to the edge of the drawer front. Once the drawer fronts were done, I fixed them to the drawer boxes with some double-sided tape and screws from the back through some holes I drilled earlier. I spent a bit of time getting all these gaps perfect, so as you'll see when it came time to paint, I left the drawer runners and drawer fronts in place rather than remove them. The dresser is going to be spray painted, so I added these little blocks to the front with double-sided tape to hold a piece of cardboard to protect the insides. I haven't shown it in the video, but the back of the dresser has now been fixed in place with glue and nails. I also masked off the drawer boxes with plastic garbage bags. I think applying the finish to a project is my favourite part of the whole build process, because that's when you get to see all your hard work and time come together as a finished product. I used my new Wagner Flexio 690 sprayer, which is great. I've always said how much I like my old Wagner sprayer, which I'd been using since before I even started YouTube. But I wanted to get a gravity fed system, so I upgraded to this one, and it's a huge improvement. Everything got a coat of sealer primer first and then sanded. To sand these trickier areas, I used a block of wood with sandpaper stuck to it to get right up to the edge of the moulding. And just standard green kitchen scourer was perfect to sand the profile of the moulding. Time for the final touch. My daughter picked out this pink chalk paint, which was a perfect colour choice. Once the paint had dried, I drilled the holes for the drawer pulls using this board as a jig for the larger drawers that got 2 pulls. The smaller drawers only had 1. Chalk paint can be left as is, but as the dresser will see a lot of use, I went over it with a clear satin poly for extra protection, and it also brings out the colour more. Once everything was dry, I added the runners to the drawers, and it was time to put this beautiful piece together and in its final home.